everyone, my name is Natalie and welcome to my channel, and I have another reading update for you. March and April have been my busiest month. Considering how busy I was, I still read a considerable amount. I read 6-ish books. Because 3 of them were more like short story collections and novellas, so it wasn't as much reading as it sounds. The first book I read in March was Time Crawlers by Varen Sayal. Time Crawlers is a collection of 6 sci-fi short stories that mix elements of that genre with thriller and suspense, and even some Indian mythology. I received a copy of this book from the author in exchange for an honest review, and I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I did rate the stories individually, and the overall star rating is calculated from the average mean of those individual scores. I don't normally read sci-fi. It's more something I dabble in, although the majority of sci-fi books I have read I've enjoyed. The idea of sci-fi mixed with mythology really intrigued me, especially since it was Indian mythology, and that's not something you see very much in books. Overall, this collection had some really great concepts. There are some good and even great stories in this collection. Unfortunately, more often than not, they were really lacking in areas and needed more development, whether it was with plot or characters, or they needed better pacing. A lot of them just needed more. Some of the stories are also written in a script format versus the traditional prose or narrative format, which I thought was unique. Unfortunately, it wasn't used to its full potential, and more often than not, these were the stories that fell flat. In terms of enjoyability, Time Crawlers was a lot of fun. I did enjoy it for the most part. However, there are only 6 stories in this collection, and the whole thing is about 120 pages. And with something that short, your stories need to be stronger. My favorite stories were Death by Crowd, an online chat room interview with the creator of A Deadly Show, and Eclipse, which is about shapeshifters secretly invading Earth. Both stories are really great examples of what the author is capable of. I just wish the stories were more consistent in the vein of Death by Crowd and Eclipse, because what he chooses to develop and focus on ends up being really great. Ends up being really good. Varen Sayal does have a book coming out called Demons of Time that draws on a lot of the concepts presented in Time Crawlers, and I am going to read it as I'm curious about seeing where he chooses to go with these ideas and getting to see the characters and the plots and stuff really fleshed out, because that's what I wanted from this collection. If you're curious about my thoughts on each story, I will link my full Goodreads review in the description box. Editing Natalie popping in to talk about this next book because the original part I filmed was an absolute mess. The next book I read in March was Kisses from Katie by Katie Davis and Beth Clark. I had to read this for a book report for my Faith and Business Ethics class. It's a nonfiction book about Katie Davis, who, after graduating from high school, convinced her parents to let her do mission work in Uganda. The agreement they came to was that she would live there for a year before returning to the United States to pursue a traditional college education like her parents wanted. What starts out as this kind of short-term mission work turns into a lifelong commitment when Katie decides to start a nonprofit organization dedicated to meeting the basic needs of the villages and communities around her, so food, water, medicine, and education. The book mainly focuses on the first 1.5 or 2 years of her life in Uganda. I don't really know what to classify this as memoir, biography, autobiography, because it does have some of Katie's original journal entries from when she lived in Uganda, but the vast majority of the book is written in a narrative prose, and that is the part that is written by Beth Clark. The weird thing is, even though Beth Clark is writing it, it's still in first person, as if it's from Katie's perspective. I did not rate Kisses from Katie, and I honestly don't know how to rate it or how I would rate it. I have very mixed feelings that I'm still trying to sort out. I did like a lot of the messages and themes this book presented. I liked how it pointed you back to the very basics of faith, relying on God for the everyday needs and the little things in life, not just the big things. And I also liked how it addressed how hard that can be in a first world country like America, because we have such easy access to the things that we need. And we also have the money to afford not just the things we need to survive, but also the things we want. It was a very inspirational read, and I did a lot of highlighting. Pretty much everything that I didn't like about Kisses from Katie came from the parts that Beth Clark wrote. Sometimes the way that things were framed or phrased, they just came across as kind of judgmental or holier than thou. But if you look at the journal entries, the part Katie actually wrote, that's not the attitude that she has at all. She's very humble. Beth Clark also frequently refers to the skin color of the children Katie is working with, like my brown-skinned babies and things like that. You are constantly being reminded that these children are Black and Katie is not, and combined with the other things I had issues with, it kind of comes off as Katie is better than your average person, and she's such a good and faithful Christian because she's a wealthy white woman from America helping poor starving Black children in Africa. And there were just a few other things, how they were phrased were just subtly racist, but again, reading Katie's journal entry, that is not how I perceive her at all. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think some parts of the book misrepresented Katie Davis. I don't know how much control and direction Katie Davis had when it came to writing Kisses from Katie, but I do know that she has written another book completely on her own. Beth Clark was not involved, and I have heard that it is better written and also much more authentic to Katie herself. I do still recommend Kisses from Katie because it has some very important messages that I think people need to hear and that I think people can learn from. But I may go read this other book and see if I recommend it more. The third book I read, and the last one I read in March, was King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. This book is set several years after the events of the Grisha trilogy and Six of Crows duology, so obviously there will be spoilers for those series if you have not read them. King of Scars is the first book in a new duology featuring everyone's favorite sassy swashbuckling prince. You see some old characters, Nikolai of course, also Nina from the Six of Crows duology, and Zoya from the Grisha trilogy, and you also meet some new ones. The book is set a few years after the Ravkan Civil War, and the country is experiencing a major crisis. It's surrounded by enemies threatening to overtake it. There's political disunity and civil unrest, and Nikolai is struggling to hold it all together. And on top of that, he is dealing with the consequences of his involvement in the Civil War and the things that happened to him during it. Strange events start happening all over Ravka that are espoused as miracles and as work of the Ravkan saints. While Nikolai and Zoya are investigating that as well as dealing with the whole political mess, Nina is over in Fjerda on a government mission, rescuing and smuggling Grisha out of the country, while also still dealing with the loss of Matthias. I gave King of Scars 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. A very strong 4, mind you. I love this book. It was such a wild ride. It kept me on the edge of my seat. It is packed with action and suspense. There are some really great plot twists and tons of character development. And if it weren't for having to read Kisses from Katie and writing that book report, I would have finished this book so fast. I was so not prepared for the ending. I don't think you could possibly be prepared for it. I just hate the fact that it's a new book and I love it so much because it means I have to wait like probably another year before the next book comes out and I get to find out what happens. Moving on to April, I read 3 books in that month as well, and all of them were part of Penguin's Modern Classics collection. I picked them up when I was on a day trip to Oxford, and of course I had to take a peek in Blackwell's, the oldest bookstore in the city. I picked out these 3 books on a certain criteria. I wanted to pick an author that I loved, which was The Vigilante by John Steinbeck, which I actually don't have with me right now because I loaned it to my mother, and she put it in the seat pocket on the plane and left it. Still a little salty about that. The second criteria I had was for a book from an author that I wanted to read more of. And for that one, I chose The Breakthrough by Daphne du Maurier. I read some Daphne du Maurier last year and I was interested in reading more of it, so I picked up this. And the last one I chose was for an author I had either never read from before or even hadn't heard of, and for that I chose The Cracked Looking Glass by Catherine Ann Porter. Let's start with the book I don't have with me. Let's just get that out of the way. The Vigilante by John Steinbeck features 3 short stories. The first one is the title one, The Vigilante, and it is about the aftermath of the lynching of a black man from the perspective of one of the participants in the mob. Next, The Snake tells of an isolated scientist disturbing encounter with a young woman, and the last story, The Chrysanthemum, explores female suppression and marriage. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I really liked The Vigilante and The Chrysanthemums, but The Snake just got really weird. I didn't really get it, except for the fact that it had something to do with Freudian psychology. Like all of Steinbeck's other works, these stories are microcosmic. They are all about a certain place and a certain time and give a lot of insight into the Great Depression and your everyday American citizen, and that's what I like about John Steinbeck. The Breakthrough by Daphne du Maurier is like a paranormal sci-fi story. It's about a man who is sent to a government research facility in the middle of nowhere. The experiments are top secret and rumored to be very strange, and the team working them is thought of to be deranged by anyone who's ever encountered them. The experiment he helps out with ends up challenging his perspective of death and the afterlife. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was very intriguing. I will say that the plot twist and the themes of scientific ethics and trying to find the cure for death are pretty predictable and not unique in any way, but it was still written in a way that was very compelling and riveting. The Cracked Looking Glass by Catherine Ann Porter is about a young woman contemplating her life and marriage. It says a lot about women and what was expected from them and what they struggled with at the time. I gave it 3.5 stars. It wasn't bad, and I don't think it was poorly written. It just wasn't my cup of tea. I think it was just the writing style that I didn't connect very well with. It also kind of reminded me of A Pair of Silk Stockings by Kate Chopin. I love Kate Chopin. I like A Pair of Silk Stockings better. Again, they address the same things. I just like Chopin's writing style more. Overall, I really liked my experience with the Penguin Modern Classic. They're really affordable, they make for quick, easy reads, and I also think they are good for being introduced to different authors. Those were all the books I read in March and April. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know by giving it a thumbs up. I also have some London vlogs and book reviews coming your way, so make sure you are subscribed to my channel and click the notification bell to get notifications about new videos. Have a wonderful rest of your day, keep reading, and I will see you next time here on the Mighty Quill.